Over the last 3 years on this channel, I've owned and daily driven every single Apple Silicon Mac. I've experimented with them, pushed them to their limits, and used them to create a ton of different stuff, from Excel spreadsheets, graphs, travel photos, videos, web development, and even some coding. But after all of this, which one is my favorite? And more importantly, which one is the best for you? Okay, so in this video, I'm going to briefly run through each Mac model and give you an idea of who should buy it and who shouldn't. Let's start with the most popular lineup, which is the MacBook Air. Now, I'm not going to sit here and blabber on about the M1 Air too much because I've already done that in like 50 videos. So I think the most relevant question to ask is it still a good buy? Well, if you're talking about it as a laptop overall, yes, it's still powerful enough, even though it's now 3 years old. And there's nothing inherently wrong or outdated with it either. Not to mention, because it's been out for so long now, if you can call 3 years long, you can pick up a lightly used or refurbished model for extremely cheap. That being said, if you can stretch your budget a little bit more, the newer M2 MacBook Air is a better buy. It just has a couple of really nice improvements that individually aren't really that much, but when combined really do make it a nicer and more functional laptop. Now, some examples of this include the better speakers, webcam, more powerful M2 chip, better media engine for some occasional light video editing if that's something you like to do, and of course MagSafe. And it all just adds up and in my opinion is worth the premium over the M1. Now I have a full video on all the differences if you're curious. Now this also includes the 15-inch M2 MacBook Air. I mean, it's almost identical to the 13-inch version. Again, I made a separate video comparing the two in depth. Now, all you really need to consider when comparing the two is the extra 2 inches on the 15-inch version. It might not sound like much, I mean, 2 inches never does, right?
What?
But you really do gain a significant amount of screen real estate. Now, comparing it to the 13-inch M2 MacBook Air with the XL test, for example, you can see just how much more you can fit on the 15-inch screen, highlighted in blue. Bigger isn't always better, but when it comes to Excel spreadsheets, I beg to differ. And if you tend to split view apps and have them side by side, it's much more comfortable on a 15-inch screen too. Now, are these extra 2 inches worth the compromise in price and portability compared to the 13-inch MacBook Air? Well, in my opinion, it is, but again, just watch my comparison video where I go into detail on that. Now, regardless of which Air model you choose, you'll get an ultra lightweight and portable laptop, which is kind of important for a laptop, right? With surprising performance. I mean, you can do some pretty impressive stuff on these base model M1 and M2 chips. Everything from intense multitasking to photo editing, coding and development, and of course, more. Now, I've never really run into any major performance bottlenecks as long as my workload is realistic. And that's the key point here, realistic. I mean, you can't expect these devices to render insane 3D models or edit 8K video with effects, for example, right? They don't have a fan in the first place, and they're not supposed to be ultra powerful. So in conclusion, for the MacBook Air, get the 13-inch M1 Air if you have a really tight budget, get the M2 Air if you have an extra few $100 to spare, or get the 15-inch Air if you don't mind a slight hit to affordability and of course portability, but in return you'll get a much more productive screen size. Now, just before we get into the next MacBook in the lineup, a quick word from the sponsor for this section of the video. What would you do if someone steals your personal photos or spies on you via your webcam or has access to everything you type? The good news is that these security threats are preventable if you use an award-winning tool called Bitdefender Total Security. With multi-layered protection, Bitdefender software keeps your devices safe from all existing and new cyber threats. From viruses, worms and trojans to ransomware, zero-day exploits, rootkits, and spyware. Additionally, the webcam protection feature ensures webcam leaks will never happen to you. And together with the microphone monitor, you can see what apps access your device's microphone and when. Plus, Bitdefender has an anti-tracker extension that blocks trackers to keep your browsing data private. And as a bonus, it makes loading web pages faster. The best part is, it doesn't affect your device's performance, When you work, play a favorite game, or if you're watching a movie, Bitdefender will never distract you with annoying notifications. So try Bitdefender now and get a special discount by following the link in the description below. Now, to finish off the 13-inch lineup, we've got to talk about the 13-inch MacBook Pro. Honestly, I just think this laptop is in a weird place, right? Like, it's kind of like the middle sibling that gets ignored by the parents. I mean, you've got the super popular Air that's cheaper on one side, and the 15-inch Air and 14-inch Pro on the other side. Again, there's nothing really wrong with the 13-inch MacBook Pro. In fact, it's actually super powerful for the price due to the fan keeping the Apple Silicon inside cooler for better performance. It's also got a brighter screen and better battery life than the Air, but it's using an outdated chassis, although some people do love the touch bar, and it doesn't really offer that much more when compared with its cheaper brother, the Air lineup, especially the M2 Air with the new and redesigned chassis. And for that reason, I just no longer think it's worthy of the Pro name, especially due to the limited port selection. And can you really call a laptop Pro if it can only connect to one external display? By the way, that's also the case for the Air lineup as well. So yeah, on its own, the 13-inch MacBook Pro is a great laptop, but when you compare it to the other Apple Silicon MacBooks on either side, not so much. Especially when you realize that the base model 256GB SSD and 8GB of RAM configuration is going to be extremely limiting in a lot of situations. Like I've said in previous videos, these M2 chips are really RAM or unified memory hungry, and you'll actually unlock a lot of performance by bumping up to 16GB. So by the time you upgrade the SSD and also the RAM on the 13-inch MacBook Pro, it's getting close to 14-inch MacBook Pro price territory. Honestly, I just can't recommend this laptop to anyone right now. It's not bad, it's just that it doesn't make sense compared to the other options out there. Now, the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, on the other hand, are definitely worthy of the Pro name. Now, I'm going to mostly focus on the latest M2 versions of these MacBooks here, because there's almost zero difference between the M1 and the M2 versions, apart from a moderate jump in performance. Now, just bear in mind, again, like the M1 and M2 MacBook Air, you can get the M1 version of the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro at a really good price now, sometimes a few $100s cheaper. I'll leave some links down below with all the best prices for all these Macs as well. And if you're wondering, the only difference between the 14-inch and 16-inch versions is form factor and price. The 16-inch is heavier and, of course, larger, and costs $500 more, which I think is going to be the main deciding factor for most people. Now, if you can get over this pretty big price difference, the 16's larger screen size is incredible. Now, I do a lot of creative stuff and even Excel work from time to time, and I can spread it all out or even comfortably use two windows side by side on the 16-inch. Now, you can still do this on the 14-inch, but it does feel a little bit more cramped and you don't have a lot of room to sort of spread things out. On the flip side, the 16 is also nowhere near as portable as the 14, despite what some people out there claim, including, I'm sure, some comments down below for this video. Now, I've taken both traveling extensively. I've done a lot with both of these machines, and the 16-inch version just can't easily be used properly on airplane tray tables, for example. It might not fit into certain laptop sleeves or bags, and the extra weight can really add up if you're carrying it around all day, or if the flight you're taking it on has a carry-on luggage weight limit. And for a lot of flights that I've flown in the last 12 months, there's a 7-kilo limit. So, the extra weight difference from the 14 to the 16 can kind of really stack up there. Performance-wise, again, there are plenty of videos out there showing the capabilities of these laptops. So I'm not going to bore you with tons of graphs and stuff. What I do want to touch on though is the Pro and the Max chips. Now, both of these chips are particularly well suited to more demanding workflows like 4K video editing, animation, game design, or just doing lots of tasks at once while multitasking, which is something I personally do a lot of. Not to mention the port selection is significantly better than the more entry-level MacBooks I just talked about, and also the Liquid Retina XDR screen with 120Hz refresh rate is just straight up beautiful. Now, I was also super impressed with how well Apple Silicon stacks up against powerful Windows laptops. Sure, the Windows computers come out ahead in areas like app compatibility, affordability, gaming, and 3D modeling, but in a lot of other things, the MacBook did as good, if not better. And I also have a video on that in more detail if you're interested. Now, the best bang for buck here, in my humble opinion, is the base model 14-inch MacBook with the Pro chip. It's what I'm daily driving right now, and it's currently my favorite Apple Silicon MacBook. It just seems to have the perfect balance between screen size, portability, battery life, and performance. I mean, look, sure, you can go in and upgrade the Pro chip and get a few more CPU and GPU cores, but that really doesn't add a whole lot more performance. And at that point, I would just bite the bullet and get the Max chip instead. But before you make that decision, I did notice that the 16-inch performs better when under full load, for example, playing a game or rendering something, because of its larger chassis being able to dissipate heat just a little bit better than the smaller 14-inch chassis. But I only saw this happening on the Max variant chips. The Pro chips don't really seem to get hot enough for this to happen. So in conclusion, for the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, most people will be happy with a base model 14-inch version, and it's what I recommend for pretty much everyone, as long as you're prepared to spend more than the 13 and 15-inch MacBook Airs. Bearing in mind, by the time you upgrade the SSD and the RAM on the Airs to the same as the base model 14-inch MacBook Pro, the price difference really isn't all that much. Or upgrade to the 16-inch version for more screen real estate or to get slightly more performance with the Max chip compared to the 14-inch version with the Max chip. That is, of course, if you don't mind the reduced portability and higher price tag that comes with the 16. Most people should just stick with the Pro variant chip unless you have a specific need for the more powerful and more expensive Max variant. Don't forget that the Max variant base model comes with 32 gigabytes of RAM as a minimum too. So if you need tons of RAM and you're gonna have to upgrade the Pro to 32 gigabytes of RAM already, maybe just consider the Max for a little bit more. Next up, we've got to talk about desktop Macs. Now, currently there are 4 of them: Mac Mini, iMac, Mac Studio, and Mac Pro. The Apple Silicon Mac Mini is an incredible little machine and is one of my all-time favorites. For just $599 or $499 if you're a student, you unlock the full fan-cooled power of the M2 chip. And you get a pretty decent port selection on the back, all in a tiny, almost completely silent metal chassis. Now, I actually prefer the combination of a Mac Mini plus a decent monitor instead of the iMac. There's nothing wrong with the iMac. I mean, it's a great computer in its own right and the screen is super nice, but I'm just not a big fan of all-in-one computers, right? Like the ports are usually hard to reach on the back. You'll need some kind of adapter. Positioning on your desk is a little bit harder. And if anything stops working, like the screen, for example, you lose your entire computer and your screen in one go. That being said, it is a good option as a no-fuss family computer or something like that, where you just need something basic and simple. For more performance, port selection, and of course price, the Mac Studio is a good pick too. Just like the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, I don't think paying so much extra for the next best thing, or the Ultra chip from the Max chip in this case, is worth it over just the normal Max chip. Unless, of course, you know you're going to take full advantage of it and you need a lot of GPU cores and unified memory. And don't forget about the M2 Pro Mac Mini either. It's a good middle ground between the entry-level Mac Mini and the entry-level Mac Studio. Like I said before, you can actually squeeze a lot of performance out of the Pro chip, so going for the Studio might be overkill for you, depending on your situation. Regardless of which one you choose, know that both are just completely silent. You can't hear the fan, and their desktop footprint is really tiny. I mean, hell, for the Mac Mini, you can just slap it on the back of your monitor, and I'll link a video and some accessories to do that in the description down below. Yeah, I mean, it's safe to say I just really like both of these products, and you really can't go wrong with either one. Finally, we have the Mac Pro. And no, you probably shouldn't buy it. Now, realistically, the only people buying it are professionals who have a very specific and very niche workflow and require access to the PCIe expansion capability. So in conclusion, for desktop Macs, get the M2 Mac Mini for the best bang for buck, the M2 Pro Mac Mini for a mid-range all-rounder, or either the Max or Ultra variant Studio if you want ultimate performance. Now, I personally don't recommend the iMac or the Mac Pro, like I said, unless you have a really specific need for them. But yeah, over the last 3 years of testing out all of these Apple Silicon Macs pretty much on a daily basis, I mean, I've daily driven pretty much everything from the M1 MacBook Air to the Mac Mini, to the iMac, to now the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros. Regardless of which one you get, they're all pretty good. Like, they don't really have any massive negatives or issues like some other laptops out there, or even previous MacBooks, specifically when they were running Intel chips. That being said, if you are on the fence about some of these Macs, jump down into the comment section down below, have a chat about it with me or other viewers of the channel. Also check out some of the previous videos on this particular channel. We've done a lot of coverage on the Apple Silicon Macs ever since late 2020, so I'm sure you'll find something there for you. But apart from that, thanks for watching this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.